Hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's project showcase from India Foundation for the Arts. As many of you know, India Foundation for the Arts is a national non-for-profit organization that supports and implements projects in research, practice, and education. We've been around for close to 29 years and have implemented over 800 projects across the country. Part of what we'd like to do along with implementing projects is share these projects with you, our wider audience, encourage discussions, conversations, invitations to arts projects. Today, we have a very special project from our Project 560 program. So if you're curious about the spatial distribution of sculptures, the visual culture of the cities and urban spaces we inhabit, today's showcase is for you. Before I invite my colleague John, I'd just like to share a couple of ground rules. We are all familiar with Zoom right now, but once again, I'll repeat that. If you'd like to leave your comments and chat with each other, you can use the chat box or the comment box in Zoom. At the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A. So feel free to leave your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box. If you're watching on Facebook, please leave your comments there and we'll bring your questions to Zoom so the panelists can address it. I'd like to introduce John Xaviers, Program Officer for Project 560 and our Arts Practice Program, to introduce our speakers today, as well as share a little bit more about the project that we're going to showcase.
Thank you, Menaka. Project 560 is a program at IFA dedicated to the city of Bangalore for artists, scholars, and citizens of Bangalore to engage with the city in creative ways and scholarly ways. So the project that Salila, Ravi, and Madhuri will be speaking about today is under a category in Project 560 called Arts Projects, Research and Practice. It is a research project on the public statues of Bangalore. It is a very unique study in popular visual culture as it is about the city, and the insights about the city are gathered through image analysis as well as data analytics. I'll briefly introduce Salila, Ravi, and Madhuri before I hand it over to Salila. Salila P Vanka is a professor of urban theory and spatial politics. Madhuri Rao is an architect and an educator, and Ravi Kumar Kashi is a contemporary artist and an educator. Salila is the project coordinator, and Madhuri and Ravi Kumar Kashi are the artistic research collaborators. Now it's over to you, Salila.
Thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of my co-researchers, Ravi Kumar Kashi and Madhuri Rao, I would like to extend my thanks to the India Foundation for the Arts for implementing our research. And this presentation that today, the Public in Public Art, Exploring Spatial Politics of a City, is based on a foundation project implemented by the IFA Bangalore under the Project 560 program, made possible with Sony Pictures Entertainment Fund. So without further ado, I'll just jump into the presentation. So what I'm going to do is in the next 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, I'm going to present the research that we did over the past 15 to 16 months. And it's to give you snapshots of the whole process and our findings, after which, so there might be some questions that might be unanswered through the presentation, which we hope to respond to after the presentation. So again, so the Public in Public Art, Exploring Spatial Politics of a City. And the bigger project that this presentation was based on is the IFA implemented project titled Narratives of Visual Culture and Spatial Politics, a study of public statues and sculptures in post-90s Bangalore. So the premise of the study is based on the idea that public art or art in the public realm is political, as are the dynamic forces that generate these public artifacts and artworks. So throughout our country in the recent decades, we've seen an upsurge of statuary, bigger and more overpowering than the previous one. So governments follow the practice of commissioning statues of prominent personalities as a means of paying homage and endorsing their legacy. And we've been seeing, as I said, a growing number of these statues across the country. And prominent examples in recent times include the Buddha and Hussain Sagar Lake and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel on the river Narmada, the Chhatrapati Shivaji statue in the Arabian Sea, and in our own city, Bangalore, we have the Nadaprabhu Kempegowda statue at the Bangalore International Airport. While these statues vary in artistic quality and intent, arguably they represent the visual culture of their respective locales. So again, as the premise here says, we proceed or embarked on this research on the premise that public statues and sculptures are visual markers of the socio-cultural milieu of the city and its spatial politics, and they represent aspirations, assertions, and claims of urban groups to the city and its resources. A little bit about the city that we are doing our research in, or we did our research in. So Bangalore grew from a pre-colonial market town to a colonial cantonment and emerged as a cosmopolitan public sector hub in post-independence India. And more recently, in the post-1990s era, the city has earned the reputation of being a booming IT hub. And this is where we kind of situated our the beginning of our study in. And that's because we feel that it is at this point that the city kind of took off. It kind of grew very rapidly post the 90s. And we were interested in kind of mapping what happened in the visual culture of the city in the post-90s period. And visual culture, again, it's a very vast term. We very specifically were interested in mapping the sculptures and statues of the city. And again, the things that happened to Bangalore perhaps in this time were exponential growth patterns, chaotic development, and obviously competition for depleting resources, and new spaces of consumer culture such as malls, restaurants, lifestyle stores, and recreation facilities, growing civic engagement in public governance, and also there's an influx of people from all parts of the country. And one might ask what this has to do with the visual culture, but there is obviously this idea of claiming spaces for each group that kind of we thought was visible through the statuary that appeared in those places then. And that's what we tried to kind of document in our study. So the question again is, what do the proliferating statues and sculptures in Bangalore reveal about the city's cultural and spatial politics? I would also like to add that in the beginning, I mentioned that those very big statues that are iconic of the entire city and maybe the entire region also, but our interest was more specifically to document the smaller statues and the busts that we see emerging in every street corner and sidewalks and expected and unexpected locations. One instance would be this picture that you see here, and the strange combinations as well, right? So here you see a grouping of Mother Teresa, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, you have a Buddha statue, and you have the footballer Pele, all kind of congregated in the same little corner, street corner. And one would be, that kind of piqued our curiosity as well as to why these choices and why they're located where they're located. Our study area, again, it was quite, we kept it a little flexible. We started with taking this map of the pre-90s Bangalore. This is from the 70s, 69. And we wanted to look at all the prominent localities and what would have been considered Bangalore at that time. So that included the old city, the Pete, the cantonment, Majestic, Malleswaram, Alsur, Baswangudi, Banashankari, JP Nagar, Jayanagar, Vijayanagar, and Kormangla. But as we proceeded with our study, we also kind of at times strayed away from our site and went beyond these boundaries as well, because we noticed that it was the statuary was kind of happening outside of these edges as well. So a very quick note on the research process and the methods. The 2-3 things. First was we extensively we read, of course, secondary data and collected information on what's already written on the subject. And there's not a whole lot on public statuary of Bangalore per se. And that's why that's what makes this project very interesting, because we feel like we're doing something quite, we've done something quite new and path-breaking. And there's, of course, then there's, in terms of primary data collection, we did photo documentation of the sculptures and statues. So this was, that's Madhuri taking a picture of Rajkumar bust. And then we visited the studios of artists, in particular 2 artists that I will talk about a little later as well, Sri Chalapati and Sri Shivakumar. And both of them have had an immense influence on the public statues that we see in Bangalore today. And the other thing that we tried out this in the study was crowdsourcing for information via social media. So we created this Instagram handle called 080 Sculptures Statues, and we invited the participants. Of course, it was restricted to people that are on that use Instagram. So we can't really claim to have captured or reached out to a bigger audience, but anyone that was on Instagram, and we kind of invited them to share images with the location of any busts and statues that they saw in their neighborhoods or while they were passing through some other part of the city. And it had a few, other than this entire, it's helping us with the data collection. Our hope was also that they would be, we're thinking of them as, active participants and partners in this knowledge building exercise that we were involved in. And in the process, they'd also learn about the why those statues were there and a little about their own neighborhoods. So they then become citizen researchers of sorts. And we had a modest success with this experiment of ours. And we had almost about 50 to 60 contributions. And so that was quite interesting. And finally, so the analysis, the outcomes of this research were had 2-3 formats. One was the intent was to create a digital map, which kind of mapped all these images using ArcGIS, QGIS, sorry, which is a freeware. And we mapped all these statues on the on a map where people could just zoom in, and they click on that point, and you get data about that image. I'll show that to a little later. And we had an exhibition in May in Rangoli Metro Art Center, and that was quite the kind of documenting our findings at that point. And finally, we have a narratives report which would be which we would be submitting to IFA. The other thing in terms of data collection that we found quite accidentally was we were chalking out these routes to collecting, finding before we embarked on our field work. Madhuri would kind of map these statues or look for them, and then she would map these routes on the Google map. And we found a lot of public source data, open source data, like public, people were just pointing out to these images and writing their comments on Google. So that also helped us a lot in terms of locating statues we wouldn't have known about otherwise. So it was an interesting experience for us as well in terms of learning new ways of collecting data about the city. So that brings us to the our visits to the artist studios. So this is Mr. Venkata Chalapati. He's a veteran artist, and he studied in the Kala Mandira Center for Arts. And Mr. Chalapati worked in the Visvesvaraya Industrial and Technological Museum, and he is instrumental in developing new techniques of doing statues. And I think one of his, a couple of his major contributions include making statues making it easier to make statues and cheaper and also in a faster manner. And that many sculptors that followed in his footsteps started following that, and that to some extent has actually contributed to the number of statues we see in the city. So this is him in his studio, and he is credited with many statues, of course. And in the public realm, the more noteworthy ones are Reverend Ferdinand Kittel that you see to the extreme right of the picture. You see the mold here, and Vivekananda on Ford Road in near Vijayanagar. So this is the Kittel statue that you saw. You've seen it, the mold here, right? So this is the one. And this Kittel statue is located at the end of MG Road, and it's kind of tucked away in a little park, which is not very visible from the road. But then Ferdinand Kittel is a very important figure in Bangalore's or Karnataka's history. He was a missionary, and he is credited with developing a Kannada English dictionary, and he's also credited with translating a lot of other works. And therefore he occupies an important place in our city's history. And in fact, Austin Town, I think, has been renamed Kittel, if I'm not mistaken. This is the other artist, Mr. Shivakumar. That is, of course, Ravi and Madhuri. We visited his studio on the outskirts of the city. And I'm imagining you would have seen a lot. These are molds of a lot of statues that and busts you might have seen in the city. Mr. Shivakumar is also, he's a disciple of Sri Venkatachalapati, and he is, he has this, I guess he single-handedly is kind of responsible for more than 200 statues and busts that we have documented in the city. So again, these molds, the way he tells us is people come to him before some event, these fan clubs or whoever the clients are, before an event, or if there's or they want to place a statue somewhere, and they approach him, and then it takes him about a couple of weeks or more. Ravi and Madhuri can add more to that process, and he's able to provide them with the bust. So this is his studio, and this is a statue of Kempegowda that Shivakumar made. This is the second statue of Kempegowda that is in front of the Gavi Ganga Dareswara temple in older part of Bangalore. And interestingly, Mr. Shivakumar has a great role in the representation of Kempegowda as we see him in the city now. He has he did some research based on this, or one of the older statues of Kempegowda that is in this temple in Bangalore, and based on the facial features and his own research on maybe what Kempegowda would have kind of looked like, he imagined him like that, and now that's become the predominant representation of Kempegowda. These are a few other statues by Shivakumar, which you may recognize. This is, of course, Sir M. Vishwesvaraya, Dr. Rajkumar. There are multiple versions of Rajkumar or portrayals of Rajkumar. Many of them are from movies that he has acted in, and so those are the characters that he would have played. This is Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda at Yediyur. Just a little about, as I mentioned earlier, we mapped all these statues with the help of our research associate Shruti Rashmit. And she helped us by, we would share this, and these were the various criteria that we wanted added to the information that we wanted on the maps. So all those little dots, each of them points to one statue or a bust, and Shruti would map those using the GPS coordinates. And then she would create these, she would add these various fields. So the fields that we were looking at is the location and site specificity, the socio-political context and identity, not very easy to spatialize that, of course, but other information like patronage and maintenance and other attributes of the statue. So the type, the theme, the timeline, the funding, the patrons, the number of statues, material, scale, etc. So again, we were using, we found that we were not able to add all the fields to each of these blocks. We were using this software called QGIS. So some of the information was, so 5 fields were, we could add 5 fields to each image. So and this is something we thought would be very helpful, going forward, and we could add more and more as we found more. So we mapped nearly 500 statues here then. This is the distribution of the map statues across the city. Overall, at the end of our study, we documented almost 750 statues and sculptures, and still counting if we, and this is a very zoomed out version, so you don't really get to see the number. All those various colors then represent the different categories. The legend is there to the side, but it's not visible. So the various categories included historic figures, political figures, cultural figures, actors, and more categories within each of those, reformers, and so on and so forth. Some abstract sculptures, contemporary sculptures, etc. So those various dots with the various colors then represented all of those. And we found that, so this pie chart kind of gives us some idea of the kind of breakdown that we had of these statues. Then, so you see a lot of contemporary statues. We also found a lot of Rajkumar statues, Dr. Rajkumar statues, and B.R. Ambedkar, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar statues. And that kind of gives a sense of that. So this image, this slide basically gives a flavor of the various categories of statues that we saw, or the installations and sculptures and statues that we saw. So it ranges from film personalities to the lion that you see, that is quite, it's a symbol of, I guess, power and pride. And then you see political figures, and then you see literary figures like Kuvempu and DVG, and then you have more abstract figures or sculptures like this aeroplane that you see down here, that's by Yusuf Arakal, that's his, and then there's this, there are other works which don't have names, and so most of them actually don't have names other than the artists that I mentioned. Many of these statues, their makers are kind of anonymous. That's something I'll come back to later again. So this just and also the representation, as I mentioned earlier, many of them actually don't look like the people that they're representing, but we kind of get a sense of who it is based on, you know, certain markers of that individual itself. For instance, this statue of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar here, there are certain aspects that, or certain elements or accessories that we kind of associate with him, his glasses, and the color of the suit that he wears, and then his hand being maybe the stance of the statue itself gives it away. So there are multiple aspects of the individual that then become more symbolic of who that person is, than an accurate representation. So that, and then at the bottom right, you have Sandeep Unikrishnan, who was martyred in Bombay. And so there are also many are maybe repetitions, the molds that you see of Shankar Nag and Rajkumar, etc. And then you have these standalone, individual, unique, single or one or two of statue or busts of people that are of significance to the city. So now I'm just going to talk about some of the, so we started once we had all this data together, we started preparing for this exhibition, and also started thinking about, you know, how do you kind of bring all this 750 statues and the information we gathered together in a way that is comprehensible and comprehensive. So we started categorizing them in terms of their uniqueness, or maybe the controversies, or the ubiquity of the statues. So we kind of created these various categories, and that's how we proceeded then. So these are, I just want to highlight a few of them that have, and the stories behind them. And that's the other thing. We another aspect of our study was to kind of dig deeper into some of the statues and sculptures, and find out more about what we would have read about them also, right? So a secondary research would already tell us that there's something different about this particular installation. So some of those stories then we tried to kind of shed more light on. But in this case, so this is Tiruvalluvar, and the story behind this is an Alsur, and he's a Tamil poet saint. And for a long period of time, I think the statue remained kind of under wraps, because there was a kind of conflict about the identity politics that come into play, then him being from a different state. And so then that was finally resolved with his statue being kind of unveiled here at the same time in Chennai. bust at a statue of Sarvagnya, that is a Kannada saint poet, was unveiled around in the same month, in the next couple of days or so, within the next 2-3 days. Then this is a very, so that was this is a very unique Bangalore-based story here. This is Head Constable Timmaya. He was known, he nicknamed Mise Timmaya because of his whiskers. And he stood at the GPO circle near Vidhan Saudha, and for several years. And that's where he manned, that was the square that he manned, or that was the intersection that he manned. Then he lost his life in 1995, saving 2 pedestrians who were going to be hit by a van. So in the process, saving them, he lost his life. And he was very well known and well beloved in the department, as well as the people that were around there. So through popular, kind of demand and petitions, eventually, several years later, the city police they installed this statue, this bust of his, and in the GPO square, so there it is now. And he's also the mascot for the Bangalore police. So you might have seen him and seen this bust for sure. And he holds a very special place in the city's, stories about statuary. These are, again, so in terms of, these are some statues and installations that one might have seen. We call them anonymous because there's no, we have no clue who made them and why they are where they are. Maybe the cars are the one near Jayanagar, Bannerghatta for sure is near the RTO. This is in Yelahanka. And this this baby in the middle it's in Jayanagar 4th block. There are several such installations in that 4th block. The linear gardens that you have in the 4th block, and there's not. It's kind of, we don't know who made those, and it's hard to also find information. So, and then you'll find some very artistic kind of installation like this under a flyover, and not sure why it is standing where it is. So that's also something that we found in our journeys through the city, just finding the most unexpected installations in the most unexpected places at times. And then the acknowledged, of course, there are installations like this. This is, again, as I mentioned earlier, this is the last, it's called Science and Technology Takes Off. It's on MG Road and right near the venue of where our exhibition took place, actually. This is the late Yusuf Arakal artist, Yusuf Arakal, and the sponsor is Biocon Limited. So some of these some statues that have been kind of sponsored by corporate houses and so on do acknowledge their makers, and there's a little more information on them. And so this is it. And this is we wanted to mention Dr. Rajkumar, and this is at Southern Circle. And highlight him for sure, because Dr. Rajkumar, as we know, holds a very special place in Karnataka. He is the kind of considered as the epitome of Kannada culture, and what he's done to support the language, and his performances in the movie, of course. And what we found is there are several of these busts are representations of actors, but his busts and statues kind of easily outnumber the rest of them. So out of every 100 statues of actors, at least 60 would be his for sure. So there's a huge number of Rajkumar statues, Dr. Rajkumar statues in different representations, dotting different parts of the public spaces across the city. Then similarly, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who is a Dalit icon and a national leader and a statesman, and his contribution to the Constitution, of course. And so we see him in different, right from Vidhan Saudha, outside of the Vidhan Saudha, into the humblest of neighborhoods. You see various representations of Dr. Ambedkar, and in different forms again, and either the entire statue or the bust And we saw he was also kind of, his statues kind of were all across the city. And so we call them the ubiquitous statues, Rajkumar and Dr. Ambedkar, because the sheer numbers of their statues across the city. The other noteworthy thing, sorry, just. So the other noteworthy observation was the paucity of women in the public realm, statues of public women in the public realm. So the images that you see here are literally the only images of women or statues of women that we saw in the public realm. So, and the pie chart kind of represents that. Then you see that little sliver there. In all the statues that we documented across the city, this is the number of, that was the percentage of women in the public realm then. And of these two, Parvati Rajkumar, who's the third from the bottom right, and Mother Teresa, of course, and you have Indira Gandhi to the left, top, and Rani of Jhansi on the top. So some of them are women from this, not Rani of Jhansi, maybe around past 100, 150 years, they were here, I mean, kind of amongst us. But others are the River Kaveri, for instance, and the others, the kind of more Kaveri, of course, is a physical representation of a river then. So it's a mytho-historical kind of figure. And so we felt that there was, despite women being kind of present in every aspect of our lives, public lives and public realm and jobs and professions, etc., there was a very poor representation of them in the public realm. The other interesting observation we had was the sculpture parks, and this was the way the parks, they would, with lots of sculptures in them, which did not necessarily have aesthetic or kind of artistic import, but they were, just because of their grouping, we found several of these across the city then. So one is in Lal Bagh, where the artists were invited to use the dead wood and kind of make these installations. And then you have these stone sculptures in some other places where there'll be a huge number of these, because the government every now and then invites artists from other parts of the country as well. And they have this month-long residency kind of thing where the artists are invited to. So there's no specific theme that's given, which is why you see a wide range of sculptures. They're just given the material and they're asked to, invited to do what their imagination tells them to. So there's this very diverse set of sculptures that then is kind of all lumped in that area. So we saw a few of those across the city then. And more recently, we found the one with these animals, and that's using recycled material then. So the entire park had several of those. So these sculpture parks seem to be kind of growing in popularity, and we see more of those. And these, of course, again, all of these then are BBMP or the government municipal parks where we find these, and they're within the premises and they're accessible only when the gates of the parks are open. So kind of to wrap up this presentation, then these are some of the notes that I'm just going to highlight a few points. So this research photo documented nearly 750 public statues and sculptures, and still counting, as I said. I'm sure there are many more out there. The changing themes of the statues, again, so they kind of reflect Bangalore's ever-changing social, political, and spatial terrain. So, and then statues are, what we find is sculptures are aesthetic and sometimes abstract statements on varied themes. And that's how we make the distinction. Statues are visual markers of identity and claims of access to the city's public realm. So when you see a statue in a certain place, then you know that there's a certain group that has kind of put it there, and that group actually represents has a certain identity related to language or related to a certain community. and that these statues are then visual kind of markers of that. In that sense, they mark that space and they appropriate that space on behalf of that community. Technology and new materials, as I mentioned earlier, the sculptors' work. New materials have made statuary affordable, faster, and easier. And that's been one more reason we are seeing a proliferation of these statues everywhere, because they're much easier to make and they're more affordable. So where the artists earlier would have worked only with metal or brass or more expensive materials, now fiberglass and other materials, which are then colored or spray painted to look like metal, have become extremely easy to make, and they're more affordable for sure. They cost a tenth of what the metal equivalent would have. And that has certainly kind of added to the enthusiasm with which statues are being added to the public realm. Patrons of the statues, this is something we were interested in finding, as in, of course, the government plays an important role, and you see the government-sponsored statues across the city, but there are so many others, the smaller ones that you see around in your own neighborhoods, perhaps the smaller ones. So we were interested and curious in seeing who sponsors those. So these include, of course, government bodies, corporate sponsors, as we already saw, fan clubs, trusts, and residents groups. So people petition their local corporator, and through the corporator, then funds are made available. And to some extent, even the groups themselves collect money and then sponsor it. For instance, in one place, actor Shankar Nag holds a special place in the hearts of auto drivers, because he played this role in a movie, I think, called Auto Raja. And they really think he kind of dignified their livelihood and their ways of life. And so in this particular street junction, they collected money and sponsored a bust of his. So though there are instances of those as well. BBMP parks are the most common location for government-sponsored statues and sculpture parks, as I already mentioned. What we found, again, as I mentioned elsewhere, is copious information on the sponsors of the statues. So all these podiums beneath the statues or the bases would have immense number of names and details of the people that actually are kind of associated with that area. But then there's little or no information on the artist themselves. So unless the artist has maybe carved their name in some places we found, like Shiva Kumar puts his initials, then we know that it's by this particular artist. Otherwise, there's hardly any information on the makers of these installations then. So, and also in a sample of 200 statues across different localities, many of these statues, so predominantly we saw the representations of political leaders and actors. So these are some images from our exhibition, which is titled On a Pedestal, and we had it between 12th and 14th of May in Rangoli Metro Arts Center. And so there we, as I mentioned earlier, we kind of thematized all our findings and created these various panels, and we had a fairly good response in terms of attendance, and that's of course the IFA team on top with our team, and so these are some images from there. Then just want to end with this particular articles clipping that we found in late 2022, just as we were at the peak of our own data collection and analysis. So that headline says, as you can see, BBMP now counts bust statues in Bangalore. So the Bangalore Municipal Corporation started and collecting or counting them, because they're losing track. So as the article says, how many busts and statues are there in Bangalore? Even the city corporation does not know. So now the BBMP engineers have now been entrusted with the task of counting the number of statues in the city and to verify whether they're legal. And this even as BBMP continues to get permission from citizens and organizations to erect more busts and statues. Officials said they get an average of 8 applications per day. And most of these are for statues of politicians and eminent people. In the wake of the unexpected demise of Puneet Rajkumar, whose statue you see to the right here in Kallappa Circle in Kamanhalli, there was a big, immediate demand for Puneet Rajkumar statues, and now we're seeing a spate of those, or of his busts being placed by themselves, as you see here, or alongside the bust of his father, Dr. Rajkumar, or any other eminent personality. So suddenly we are seeing, so that is again a reflection of this, what's happening in the city today. And so there's an immediate kind of response in the public realm, and it's a kind of a public reaction to what's happening, right? So that to what's happening in the city. So the visual culture then becomes a very strong indicator of that. Then, finally, these officials say, while taking up encroachment clearance drives, we found that many buses and statues have been erected at traffic junctions, creating inconvenience to motorists. They have to be removed. We need to know the status, whether they're legal or not, as it is a sensitive issue, or we're taking steps cautiously to ensure that all legal procedures are followed. So again, it's a very fascinating topic, because we do see these in our neighborhoods and our localities on a daily basis, and we don't know how they come and where they come from. And this research was trying to get a sense of those questions. And again, so this is how I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thanks to IFA again. Thank you.
Thank you, Salila, for such a fascinating presentation. So given the magnitude of the study research that you've done with photo documentation of nearly 750 statues, the way that you have summarized the study is quite visually enriching and full of insights, including the emotional registers of the city, as well as a lot of socio-political insights, especially the pie diagram with only less than 5% of women's representation in public stature is quite telling about our society and our politics of representation. So I'd like to start the conversation by asking Ravi, as a contemporary artist who has been highly inspired by popular visual culture. In your solo show of paintings, they are highly inspired by visual culture, as well as you also wrote a monograph that was published by Reliable Copy, which is titled Flexing Muscles. So you have been involved in the visual culture of the city for quite a long time. But during this IFA project, is there any new insight that you gathered? What inspired you further as an artist? Would you like to share your process as a researcher?
Thank you, John. Basically, almost for 20 years now, I've been documenting the city visual culture. I've been documenting the banners, posters, and all the other aspects like images and vehicles and so on. Occasionally, I had documented the statues. In 2014, in RV College of Architecture, I had guided an elective. It was about the public art in the city. So at that time, we had documented some statues and murals and other visual markers of the city. But when Salila and Madhuri and myself, we met in the college and we started talking about it, we thought we'll focus on this much more deeply. So that's how this entire aspect of the statues and sculptures of the city we started documenting. Born and brought up in the city, even for me, the numbers of the sculptures is amazing, in the sense, initially when we started, we thought we'll get about 200, 250, 300, then it became 400, 500. So finally we landed up 750, and we're very sure that much more, at least 100, 150 statues are there, because we have not done a grid search. After we started documenting the initial what we knew, then we went to other sources, or just walk, drive into a new area and then look for statues and all that. So that way, the number itself is something that is telling, in the sense how how the statues and sculptures have become a certain expression of the city, the kind of identity politics, the anxieties of the Kannada-speaking population, which kind of manifests in the flag poles that you see with Kannada flag. And normally then after that, there'll be a flex banner of either Rajkumar or Puneet Rajkumar or one of the Kannada actors, then the statue will come. So it's like a gradual process that happens. So this is a fascinating, even I have documented in my own area also. Initially, there'll be, one flagpole, then the flex banner, and then the statue. So it's like a trajectory of those things. So when the other surprises were when we started analyzing them, as Salila mentioned, and you also were noting, the number of women statues in the city is abysmal. In some way, or rather, in a very glaring way, it reflects the patriarchal, system that doesn't recognize the women in public realm. No statue of a heroine can be found. All the other statues of the film is all Rajkumar and Vishnuvardhan and male actors, basically. So that is very interesting. And other than, the police Thimaya, who was a low-level head constable, very low rung in the kind of hierarchy. The only other low-level, this one is Muniappa, who in the corporation precinct, the statue is there. He used to organize the power karmikas of the city. So only these are the two statues who you think of, if you look at the hierarchy thing. So they are the lowest level. So these are some of the interesting things. And also the number of fiberglass statues is what is also, giving you a glimpse of how the money is being spent and the differences there.
Thank you, Devi. It's wonderful the way that you are identifying certain kind of spatialization of how statues are arranged in the city. So that takes me to Madhuri Rao, whose involvement in the project has been that of researching, including photo documentation, but also the computer aspects of visualization and understanding the big data macro view of the city. So, Madhuri, would you like to share the process that you have went through and a certain kind of flipping of perspective, which is that of when you take photographs of statues, it's from a human perspective, a linear perspective, but when you're working on the geotagging, then it would be like a omniscient perspective of cartography. So how was that experience of flipping two kinds of view of the human and the Zenith?
Thank you, John. Actually, the process of documenting these statues changed in the course of the project as well. And it's interesting that you bring up these two aspects, right? One is of photographing them and one is of mapping them. Okay, and both of them gave us two very, very different ideas of how statues are understood as part of the public realm. So quite often when we started photographing these statues, we were not, in some places, we were not allowed to bring in a DSLR and a much better camera also. So we had to do it almost like during a recce, it was, on the sly, we had to take pictures and then record them. And places like Vidhan Sauda, for example, we had to almost wait for a whole year to get permission to photograph in Vidhan Sauda. So photographing, the idea, the methodology of photographing completely changed because we did it on our phone cameras, most of it, where we thought actually we would be photographing them properly with high resolution cameras, etc. That is also because that most of these statues, unlike anywhere else in the world, right, are not accessible. They are usually placed in traffic islands or like, on a pedestal in fenced traffic islands again, right? And people cannot go too close to them, which could mean that, that sometimes there are sensitive statues in the location. Sometimes there are, there are different types of demography in that of the location, etc., which had to be considered. Some of them were even caged and locked. And so it actually told us about who are the people who it was put up for and who are the people that, share their daily life with the statue in a sense. And when it came to mapping, it was interesting because what we would do is actually chart out routes for ourselves. And like Salila mentioned, it would be through Google Maps. Sometimes it would be already mapped, and sometimes through our Instagram page. What would happen is people would contributions would come in on the Instagram page, and then we would follow up and ask them, where was this, and can you tell us the exact location address, and we would put them onto these routes and then go and map them ourselves again. And then the QGIS person actually mapped it. Interestingly, it threw up different things. Like I said, the analysis of these two were very different. We could see density, like if you see Vidhan Sauda, if you see Kaban Park, Lal Bagh, and if you see the city centers, very, very different from the margins. And then if you see to the east and to the west, the concentration of Rajkumar statues is much more in the west, and you will see Ambedkar in the east. And so these were interesting things that wouldn't have popped up unless we had done the mapping, the QGIS. So I think you put it exactly like how we analyzed it, and was something that came out of our study was these were two very, very different ideas. One was photography and one was mapping, and both helped us immensely. One was for pure documentation, to see the clutter, and then the other one was to see density and to reveal these patterns which we do not see otherwise.
Thank you, Madhuri. Such a wonderful response. And thinking about these two devices, which is that of the colonial power devices of cartography and photography, how they conflate in this device called smartphone, and how it enables photography and geotagging at the same time. So Menaka, shall we take questions from the audience now?
Thank you for your presentation. I think it's really interesting when we travel to the street, exactly what John is saying. You stumble on, you see a lot of statues, and then you often don't know who they are, right? And unless it's a familiar one. So it's very interesting in your project to see how you'll have mapped the not so familiar faces and the not so familiar sculptures as well. Nayan's asking a question, says amazing documentation. And can you elaborate on how you approach the idea of public, and how does your research speak to the public's perception of statues and sculptures in the city? Perhaps also, how did people respond, like when you were connecting to people in their neighborhoods, how were they responding to those statues? Also to your exhibition, when they came to your exhibition and saw these statues, perhaps maybe you could speak to some of that. Any one of you, yeah.
Hello? Okay.
Sure.
One thing that we have done is we have used two words. One is the statue and the sculpture. When we say statue, it's about the representation of an individual as close to the photographic realism as possible. And then sculpture, we understood as a creative sculpture done by a professional sculptor, who is already practicing and all that. So we did one segment in the exhibition where you have all these professional sculptors who have done their sculptures in wood and metal and all in the parks next to the Ravindra Kalakshetra or Kaban Park and all. And then some of this very wacky kind of, like the baby that we saw, or very realistic kind of animals and all. So when I was speaking to people, you realize that they tend to respond to more to these kind of very, realistic kind of sculptures, and also something that they can respond to. They'll go stand next to a very baby, those kind of thing, or dinosaur, or those kind of sculpture, rather than they can't, a large section of people cannot respond to the so-called creative sculptures put up by professional artists. So there is a huge divide, in the idea of a public perception, and then, but those sculptures are there in Lal Bagh and Kaban Park, and people just see them and walk by. And even from the Lal Bagh side, what they have done is, if there is a tree that has been, dead wood, as Salila said, they mention the name of the tree and how old it is, but not the artist's name. They could have put 2 lines about the artist and then what he's trying to, or she is trying to, portray there. That is not there. I think that will help in kind of connecting to the larger public. But the divide is there, which you could see very clearly.
Can I respond to Nan's question?
Sure, sure.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
yes.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Very interesting question, of course. So the idea of the public, right? It's a very complex one, and but for the purpose of this research, then public can be as in the post-colonial discourse, it is government. And you think of the idea of public space itself, which is what we call the commons, got categorized as public space after. After the British came to our country, even in our mapping then. So in our case, our idea of the public was literally the public realm, where it's outside of the private realms. The sidewalks, literally, spatially, it would be the sidewalk and the street corners and the streets and public parks and all of those that would come under this idea of spaces that are accessible to the city publics. So we kind of, because if you actually, I guess we went to map all the statues and sculptures, there'd be many more inside, compound walls, etc., which Ravi and Madhuri have referred to as well, and in private corporate offices, etc., other places, schools. We did not consider those. We kind of literally considered the ones that were in the public realm, that were accessible to people visually and even in terms of getting close to them, despite their barricades, etc. And in terms of public perceptions of sculptures and statues, I guess as Ravi's already shed some light on that. And Menka was asking about it in the context of our exhibition. And it was very fascinating. And it kind of, some of the responses were what we anticipated in the sense that it was to get people excited about identifying. So we had this entire panel of those 750 images, right? The statues and sculptures, all of the data that we'd mapped. And people were excitedly pointing to certain image things and say, oh, that's near my street corner. And it kind of they started identifying with those images and where it was, and it really got them hooked to the, the display, I guess. And it also kind of, in other ways, when you think of public, I talk more about the use themselves, because a lot of these statues, this busts, etc., become landmarks because they're in street corners. Or it becomes like a lot of places we saw these chai walas, the food cart people, or like a hangout place for people. We would have a bunch of people sitting at the base, etc. So in that sense, people kind of identify them as landmarks for their local areas or the neighborhoods, and they're very, very. In that sense, they are very, I guess, very relevant also for where they are, because people do kind of, they become places where people come and meet, etc. And people congregate, and even the vendors, etc., kind of locate themselves.
Thank you, Salila. There is a question in the Q&A box from Elsa De Cruz. She says, hi, thank you for sharing this really interesting research on Bangalore. I have a question regarding artistic non-partisan statues. Did you observe any particularities with time period for the artistic statues, say with location, time period, urban renewal plans, etc.? So I guess she's hinting at the modernist sculptures in the city and various time periods when they came up and its relationship with the location and time. So would you like to share your thoughts on it?
Ravi, do you want
to? Yeah, some of the early the sculptures of contemporary sculptures came up in Ravindra Kalakshetra. There is a park next to that. It's called Shilpa Vana. So the Lalit Kala Academy, with special grants from the government, they called in artists and they started this camp, artist camp, sculptors camp, and that was the first when Hadpad was there. There is it was called Samuha Shilpa. That means about 10 to 12 sculptors coming together and creating a stone sculpture. That was in the mid-80s. And after that, only little later you started seeing sculptures in the Kavan Park, Lal Bagh, which are about a decade old or so. And the corporate sponsored statues, very few, which has come up in the last 10, 12 years or so. In the MG Road, the Yusuf Farakal sculpture, sponsored by Biocon. Other than the parks, there are hardly any contemporary sculptures outside the So the modern art in Karnataka itself is, say, post 70s, a big trend came in. So there is a parallel timeline between the modernism in Karnataka art, which starts becoming a manifestation in the public areas. And the last several years, BDA has started this strategy of calling artists for a month, and then they create the stone sculptures, and then they'll be placed in these BDA parks. And so that is the timeline, as I understand it.
Sakshi
Ravi.
Agrawal. Yeah, thank you, Ravi. Sakshi Agrawal is asking, she says the documentation results blows one's minds away. How does your research dive into the politics that go behind both the requests for statues put in by the public vis-a-vis the ones that are approved by the government? Was there something peculiar that you noticed, and how did you deal with that? The ones that come up with public demand or public putting it in their localities versus the ones that are government approved?
Again, so I think the one we did, we talked to couple of bureaucrats, and we didn't talk to a lot of people who actually put in the requests. We didn't have an opportunity to do that. As I said, the one documented in our research, the police Timmaya's instance was one where there was popular demand for a particular statue, and the government actually responded to it. And so otherwise, in most cases, again, it's through, from what we understood of the process, Ravi and Madhuri can add to this. It is these fan clubs and, organizations, Kannada organizations or some other organization, language that to kind of identify with a certain individual that would put in an application, and I guess, and that's about, so you put in the application, and the collaborator then goes and petitions, puts forth the application to the government, and usually I think that's pretty much as what we understand of the process. And so we're not really aware of stories of rejection of statue applications. None of those stories really popped up. Yeah,
I think I want to add to that. We do not know of, continuing from what Salila said, we do not know of any rejections. But at the same time, I think if you saw the last slide she presented, even the BBMP does not know how many statues are there. That also means that probably all of them have not been okayed by them in a sense. And it's interesting because we do not have a statues budget per se, but most of it comes through different modes. So in some cases through the parks budget, in some cases through the ward budget, etc. So that is also one of the reasons why we do not know for sure how many are there and whether all of them were approved. But like Salila said, it's mostly through, you have to go through the collaborator, and you have to use some political clout to get that through. So it's through fan clubs, political parties. All of these are mostly the and the local and the citizens themselves who initiate the effort.
Yeah,
Ravi has something to add.
we had Urban Arts Commission for a long time, and that was a single window for approving the projects. But once the Urban Arts Commission was disbanded, there is a mushrooming of the sculptures and statues. So there is a direct correlation. Of course, we don't have the exact data, but that is the kind of. So because there is no committee, there is no experts available, either to say yes or no to any statue or sculpture being put up, it just takes the kind of organic route. Like we met some of these fan association people, so they decide that they want to have a Rajkumar statue in their locality or road, and then they collect some money and they go to the corporator or MLA, and then he will help them in getting the permission from the corporation. And on the day of the statue being unveiled, the local corporate MLA will get the large share of the present, in the sense his presence is marked with, inscribed on the stone and all that. So that becomes a very important, gesture of permission. So other than that, we don't know of any one single window where experts are also there to approve of the installation of these statues and sculptures.
So yeah, that is just to add to what Ravi and Madhuri said again. So yeah, it's a very interesting and important question, because that's one thing we said about, that was part of our set of research questions as to how does it happen, who allows these things to have, these statues to come to shape. And there's no government kind of authority or organization or the Urban Arts Commission, which seemed like one entity that had some kind of say in the matter, doesn't exist anymore. So we don't have it.
Thank you, Salila. There is a question from Harshita Batwal, who is staff at IFA, who's saying, I was curious about your observations on the time period of these statues and whether there were certain moments that you recognized when statue making and memorialization activity was at its peak in Bangalore. She says, congratulations. So I think all of you responded to these questions in various ways, but would you like to add something more about the time period of prolific statue making in the city?
Yeah, I'd like to come in here, John. Actually, this is an interesting thing. Even when we were making our project brief, in the sense like what is the time period we are going to cover, we saw that, most of the city's culture that existed were either from colonial times, okay, or after the 2000s. And when we spoke to people, and especially sculptor Shiv Kumar, he actually told us the number of Rajkumar statues, it increased post his death. So you can actually see that it's 2006 is where you see this great increase in the number of statues that were being put out in the public realm. One is the 2006 after his death, and immediately actually as an extension to that, also with the influx of a lot of other people from other states who came into Karnataka and Bangalore, especially because of the software boom, there was a sense of cultural anxiety and what could stand for Kannada identity, and people almost claiming spaces through statues, through through either through politics or through actors, Kannada icons, etc. So we do not have our study focuses on post 2000 statues, but through our sources and through the study, we know that we see this rise at almost for these two events actually.
Thank you, Madhuri. Related to that, let me ask a general knowledge question in the context of the recent power shift in Bangalore, in Karnataka. So considering the time period that you're looking at, which is post-90s, and also looking at the macro data of the distribution of the sculptures, what kind of political impulses do you read in the city of Bangalore, whether it's left-leaning or whether it's conservative or whether it's more centrist? You can keep
Kashi,
the
so you want to take this?
No, I think the popular catchword would be the vote bank politics. That dictates the the kind of statues that will come up. Traditionally, the Vokkaliga and the Lingayat communities are a dominant vote bank. So in that sense, you will see a lot more of Kempegoda and a lot more of Basavana in the city, even in terms of numbers. And then recently you have Valmiki, which is one more vote bank, which is the statue is next to the legislator home. And then you also have Kanakadasa, which is a Kuruba community icon. And interestingly, both these statues are just next to the Vidhan Sabha, but not in the precinct of the Vidhan Sabha compound. And both of them, they created a mound for them of equal height, and they're placed at the entrance of the LH. So other than the Lingayat and the Vokkaliga vote bank, the Nayaka and then the Kuruba community vote bank is very important. So you will find those. So like this, you can start making correlation between but I don't see any left or right leaning kind of trends. that is not there.
If I might
Thank
ask,
you, Ravi.
if
Sure.
I'd ask a question to the team. I know your focus has been on Bangalore. I know Ravi has done research elsewhere, but I'm just curious. So Bangalore has a very peculiar history, right? I mean, in terms of the statuary and the sculptures. So, you know, where you see Rajkumar, Shankar Nagar, now also Puneet has sprung up all of a sudden, you know, there's a proliferation of that. So because of your interest, have you seen other interesting patterns in other cities or towns in India that you might want to share with audiences if you all have had a chance to explore that?
Okay, so yeah, other towns, I just note, so it became, once we embarked on this research, we became super conscious of statues everywhere. Wherever we went, we were like, oh, sending pictures of statues and sculptures to each other from whichever part of the world, country we were. Anyway, I went to Visakhapatnam. I go to Visakhapatnam in Andhra Pradesh, and I just couldn't help noticing the number of statues of the local politicians there, and just all over. And there's this beach road, which is just this mind-boggling collection of all kinds, right from dinosaurs to politicians to elephants to you name it, and it's there. And it is just great. I mean, it's not just a Bangalore phenomenon, is what I'm trying to say here. It seems to have really taken off in other places as well. And it would be interesting actually to see the timeline and when and why they kind of took off. And I don't know what role took technology plays in it, maybe it is technology to a great extent. And yeah, I did note it's not just a Bangalore phenomenon. And I think I remember Madhuri saying that Hyderabad is. Were you talking about Hyderabad, Madhuri?
Yeah, and it's interesting actually. We call this the age of statues because we see this resurgence in this idea of why should a statue be made. And if you see again elsewhere in the world, the idea of how a statue is commissioned, where it is placed, and who are the people. There is civic pride in commissioning a statue. I mean, who are the people who are the commissioning it, whether it is the authorities, whether it is for the people, etc. Whereas in our country, I think it's a very, very different pattern, however. So we have seen actually in Andhra and Telangana, this upsurge, again in Maharashtra, could be identity, could be ideas of identity, caste, and these are the things, these are the patterns that keep coming up. And I think we also speak of something called echo in our findings, where we say that things that are happening at the national level which affect the city per se and vice versa, of how and mostly it's to do with the political climate. Also, to add to this, I think some cities have been inherently, they have, like if you see Delhi has a very, very strong, it's a much older city also, right? So it has you can see the layers of the kind of statues that are that you find there. And if you see a place like Baroda, which is steeped in this the idea of an art school, right? So you see the kind of sculptures there, and in Ahmedabad very different. So we do not know of any other study, nor have we actually studied any other city, but we are aware of certain patterns that exist in these cities.
Thank you, Madhuri. There is one question in Q&A box from Shruti. I think she was involved in the project. Thank you. So she's saying, thank you for this interesting presentation on the Bangalore city. You briefly mentioned the use of technology or methods artists are using in present times for making these sculptures, statues. If you could elaborate on its making in case of two artists present there. About methods and materials.
Yeah, so I can elaborate a little bit on that. The earlier method of making a statue was called lost wax process. That means you create the sculpture, if it is to be cast in metal, first you create it in wax, and then in the process of casting, the wax image that you created will evaporate. But now there is a new method called no-bake process, where you create a clay model, and then you take a fiberglass mold from that, and then those pieces are embedded in very fine sand, and then the casting is done in that. So that means you can make multiple molds very easily at a very lower cost. And then if there is any mistake in the casting, then no problem, because you still have the original image in your studio, all that. So and that is one. So the Chalapati, senior sculptor who we're talking about, he introduced this no-bake method of casting. He adopted that from an industrial process of sand casting. So that is one thing. And the second is the fiberglass as a material, which has changed the cast aspect. Like if it's almost 20% of what a metal sculpture would cost you. And if you already have the mold ready, like if you go to Shivkumar's studio, you'll have some 50 kind of Rajkumar. So you can say, I want this particular one, he will do it to you at a lower cost because it's already done, and then, making one more copy of that. So that has really contributed to the number of numbers increasing in terms of the statues in the city. And then especially with actors and in this one, people are not really interested in the material. They don't want a stone or a bronze statue. They just want a Rajkumar or Ambedkar image with them. So it's fiberglass, doesn't matter. They want to be part of the group, part of the trend. So that is what I see there. And the other interesting thing is whenever there is an official Ambedkar or official statue, it's normally in bronze or stone. But if it's done by local people, they do it in cement. They involve a local, sculptor. So that's why you see a lot of Ambedkar statues. The official ones are very realistic, but the ones which are closer to the settlements and lower economic groups, you can recognize them only by the iconographic details, like the color of the suit, and then the constitution book, and these classes and all that. So they're not interested in the realistic nature of that, but they know it's a Ambedkar statue. So in that sense, the material has, and the technique of making it has contributed to the increasing numbers.
Thank you, Ravi. Menaka, do we have more time to?
Yeah, there's one last comment, right? Or question, I think. We can take one more question, John.
Okay. So Nehal is saying the pie chart that you represented, showing the percentage of women sculptures, got me thinking about the absence of women figures in public spaces. How can we visually represent and effectively communicate this notable absence of women figures in our surroundings? More rhetorical question.
How do we visually represent and effectively communicate this notable absence of?
I think the exhibition was, in a sense, to show this stark. One of our sub chapters, themes was the fact of that we see only 13 women out of 750 that we have documented, and it was to bring to the spotlight in a sense as to why. I mean, how it can be done. I think in many different ways. Just by, I think what we wanted to do was just raise awareness also as to why. And if they had to be also, who would it be in a sense, right? And who would be commissioning these, and why don't we see them? Interestingly, in the study Ravi Kumar Kashi has done in flexing muscle, you even see, even when they're printed on flex banners, that probably he's better to speak about it, but you will always see them marginalized. You will see them in the corners of the flex, or you will see them accompanying their husbands or any other male member of their family or known, etc. You do not see them standing alone, open, in the thing. So there are a lot of things that can be done, I think, but I think our idea was to highlight this disparity in the number.
There are a couple of, I mean, this is not in sculptures, but there are, I think, wall art, you do see some examples. So, I mean, there's some very powerful murals that are coming. There's one on the utility building, right? And on MG Road, you have Essential, the Kapoora Karmikas, and Shiloh Shiv Suleiman. And so I think, yeah, maybe in this particular medium, and our project kind of really highlighted this stark absence. But I guess in other media, hopefully there's a little compensation happening in other places. But yeah, good question, and no, not a very good answer.
No. The statues don't happen in vacuum. So there is a power system that is generating it, supporting it. So in that sense, unless we get 50% reservation for women in the assemblies and many more cabinet members in the cabinet, women ministers, the things will not change. We can do one or two subversive kind of projects here and there, but the bigger picture will not change. So there is a direct relationship between power and then the statutes that are coming up.
Thank you, Madhuri, Salila, and Ravi Kumar for those insightful responses, and also for highlighting the importance of visual culture research as a method of implementing social reform, instigating social reform through informing. So before I hand it over to Menaka, I would like to make an announcement that call for applications for arts projects, research and practice under Project 560 will be announced very soon in August, and neighborhood projects will also be announced very soon. So please be alert to the call for applications and engage with IFA. And there is one category called curated artistic engagements, which is open throughout the year for applications. So please follow IFA on social media and subscribe to the newsletters to get timely alerts. And over to you, Menaka.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John, Ravi, Madhuri, and Salila, for taking us through the journey of your project. It really, as John has already said, helps us visualize and map the city through its engagement with sculptures and statues. And like we were discussing earlier, we hope that many other researchers and artists might explore their own cities and their own, and the proliferation of statuary in their cities as well. Thank you everyone for being a lovely audience and staying with us through this presentation. We've shared a couple of links, so do look up the media stories that this project has received, as well as check out the Instagram page for this project, which is 080 Sculpture. Do also stay tuned to IFA's social media. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, add yourself to our mailing list, and save the date for our next project showcase, which is going to be a physical event in Bangalore. It's going to be a presentation on August 21st with Mala Pradeep Sinha and Suchitra Balasubramanian, who are going to be presenting their project and their research into the textile block maker and master craftsman Maniklal Gajjar. So we hope to see many of you at this event on August 21st. So stay tuned and thank you. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.